Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia.
And my name is Aaron.
And we're going to be dedicating an entire month discussing about the American Tail franchise. And the reason why is because this year will mark the 30th anniversary of the first film, which came out in November of 1986.
Okay, just to address a couple of things before we continue, we once again are going through another heat wave here in the UK, and so the windows and doors are all open. So if you do hear anything in this podcast which doesn't sound like the podcast, we apologize in advance. And also, some people will be calling out, well, the American Tail was released in November and not in July. Well, I mean, we got something planned for November, so unfortunately we've had to move American Tail over to now. So.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, I watched this originally when I was younger, and, it's one of the movies that, my mum and dad buy, and, we put it on, and, that'll distract them for a while. And also, it was on TV quite a lot as well, so, it was quite well known, the American Tail franchise, and also Steven Spielberg was also involved within it as well, so, immediately, that immediately generates eyeballs, because, Jurassic Park, E.T., all those other movies that he was involved with, Steven Spielberg was a household name, I think, at that point. The one thing I'll say about it, though, is that one thing I was quite surprised of, coming back to it about, a good couple of decades later, is that why has this movie not stuck with me the same way, say, example, Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid or, some of the other, animated, somewhat, I guess you could say, emotional epics that came out during, the 80s and 90s. Why did this one not stick with me? Well, we're going to have a discussion about it.
All right, then. Yeah, so I guess, like we always do, we like to talk about, the behind-the-scenes stuff of, how the movies came to be. So it all started in 1984. This was based off of a concept by David Kirshner. We briefly talked about David Kirshner when we were doing Once Upon a Forest a few months back, when we were reflecting on movies that we grew up with as kids that aren't as good today as when we first saw it. And, Steven Spielberg absolutely loved the idea. And, he even put his own ideas into it, such as naming the character himself, which was named after his grandfather. And then David Kirshner collaborated with Judy Freiberg and Tony Geist, who worked on Sesame Street. And they just got off of finishing the film Follow That Bird, and then were collaborating with him to work on this film. And, Don Bluth was involved with it. He had a major success with Secret of NIMH. And then, his Irish studio, Sullivan Blue Studios, came together and decided to follow up on the major success of Secret of NIMH, and out came An American Tail. And when this film came out, it had made $84.5 million out of a $9 million budget. And actually, at the time when this was released, it was even more successful than the Disney animated film that came out a few months beforehand, which was The Great Mouse Detective.
Exactly. And so, Don Bluth, as we know, was in his rebellion stage at this point. He had a massive falling out with the Disney Corporation at that time. And he basically wanted to do, darker and more emotional, animation. And I guess looking back at now, I think, that's basically been for the best, really, I think, because we've now got some of these, movies that then went on to inspire other, darker toned, animated, epics that we've, covered in the past. So I guess you could say that, it was for the best. And though I kind of be interested to see where An American Tail sort of fits in, the whole story of non-Disney animation.
Well, it's actually funny because if you were to go into the 90s, it was actually one of the bigger franchise hits. I mean, it had an official sequel that we'll talk about next time. It had a huge staying power over in Universal Studios theme park, where around the 90s and all the way up until in maybe the late 2000s or early 2010s, it had a structure of American Tail Fievel Goes West, where it had a roller coaster. It had the characters that you can be able to meet up with, kind of similar to the Disney characters. I mean, An American Tail, alongside with The Land Before Time, was probably one of the biggest franchises that Universal had at the time of their animated features. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people have fond memories of An American Tail. They look back on it and they say it was one of the standouts of the 1980s when it came to animation, considering that, I mean, we talk about this briefly in the He-Man podcast, that, animated properties were mostly based off of toys movies, and this was around the time in which when Disney was in the dark ages. So yeah, after the likes of the 9 old men had retired, and then the new faces started popping in, and they had a massive bomb with the Black Cauldron, and were so close of ending the Disney animation division altogether. Then you have the likes of Ron Musker and John Clements saying, well, let's just give this a chance and see if maybe we can build something off of it. And while The Great Mouse Detective wasn't a massive hit, it was able to keep Disney around for a little while longer.
Yeah, because then after that, we ended up with, The Rescuers Down Under, and then we ended up with what effectively basically was, some people say the starting point, or the Renaissance era,
well,
which
the
was
Little
the Little
Mermaid. We have to also point out as well. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you had Great Mouse Detective, then Oliver and Company, and then you had The Little Mermaid, which was the start of the Disney Renaissance, and then it just continued on from there. But we've already talked about it if you're a fan of casual chats for many years, so you don't need to have us talk about it.
I mean, like, even if you're just an 80s and 90s kid, like, you don't need to be explained what the Disney Renaissance era is.
Yeah, that's true.
That's for the Gen Zers, okay?
Yeah, and any Gen Alphas or Gen Betas who eventually will become old enough to listen to us.
Yeah. So, the one thing that was amazing about American Tail, even before we get into the movie, is just how it was, received, and basically how it came about. The fact that you've got Don Bluth, the fact that you've got Steven Spielberg, the fact that you've got James Horner. Mm-hmm. James Horner, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
There is already 3 people in your team, which guarantees you success. And
Absolutely.
oh boy, was it success.
It was huge success, yeah.
Here's the thing about this. $9 million back in 1986 was it's the equivalent of our $200 million, big massive budgets. That is you want this money, you better hope it doesn't go wrong. Well, it didn't go wrong. It pulled away about $85 million worldwide.
Yeah.
And that's huge back in 1986.
Yeah. I mean, it was able to have Don Bluth become a household name. Now, Secret of NIMH, even though that it was critically successful, it wasn't a major box office hit. And it was, it was praised for a lot of people. And even still to this day, many people consider that Secret of NIMH is Don Bluth's magnum opus, but it was an American Tail that made Don Bluth into a household name.
Yeah.
And it was also the first time in which Steven Spielberg had worked on animation. Now, for the longest time, he's always been a huge fan of animation, and he always wanted to do an animated feature. And this was when him and Don Bluth collaborated with one another because Steven Spielberg really enjoyed Secret of NIMH and was really impressed with it. And so that's how they worked together, and they were able to create magic. And yeah, well, we'll talk about what happened with Steven Spielberg and Don Bluth's collaboration in the next podcast. But for now, they had a good partnership, and they were able to create a lot of magic together when they collaborated with one another.
Yeah. So I think in regards to the release, so the release was November 21st, 1986, which I think, I think is a great time to release a family movie because Thanksgiving is obviously around, and then obviously you're going into the role went into Christmas as well.
Yes.
So I think in regards to that, I mean, a lot of people would say isn't this a movie that kind of you would be for the 4th of July because this is kind of what America's all about. But I mean, which is probably the reason why we're covering it in July, I guess you could say. But the one thing I would say about the release is that, and also the running time for it as well, which is 80 minutes, by the way, and for all of this, and that's for today's standards, that's kind of short for a movie.
Right.
But I think the one thing I would say that's about American Tail is that it's not about actually this is one thing I'm kind of critical about an American Tail. We'll get back further into the story as we go further into the podcast. Is that I can sort of understand why it doesn't linger as much in my mind as some of the other movies that I grew up with, because really it's you're following Fievel throughout the entire movie, and it's only a couple of times that you get these segues into what's going on with the other characters, but they really don't have their own arcs in all of this. Really.
Well, yeah, that's
they're kind of stuck in the same arc as in the first act, and they really don't evolve any further until you finally get to the final act. And we'll talk about why I say that we're further on when we talk about the story.
Yeah, so I guess we can get things started. So it takes place in the year 1885 in Russia, and we have the Mousekewitzes, which consists of Papa, Mama, Tanya, Fievel, and then there's the baby. I don't think the baby has a name in this. So it's Hanukkah, they're celebrating, they give each other presents, and Papa Mousekewitz talks about how America is the land of opportunity and the greatest place to ever be because there are no cats in America.
Yeah, and actually, that's something I'm going to pick him up on later on in the podcast because, I just think that when we get further into the story, I'm really surprised about the way he was received at that when he said that point. But I mean, I guess you could say that this is sort of like dare I say the mouse characters in this movie are sort of a bit naive. I don't know if you.
I mean,
you
well,
see
to
that.
be fair,
Like,
I mean, of course they are. I mean,
Yeah.
this is supposed to be a representative of how immigrants were, in which they were going through a lot of hardships. And, they're Russian Jews. And as we saw later on in the movie where they were attacked by the Cossacks. And yeah, I mean, we saw that a lot of Jewish people during that time were being chased out of their land and their villages were destroyed by a whole bunch of different nations and various different types of people. And so, yeah, I mean, they were going through a lot of hardships. And, hearing news from afar about like people who left their lands going over to America, I mean, that's how a lot of cultures were. I mean, around 1885 all the way up until the early 1900s, that was the boom of immigration where people left their home countries to find better opportunities.
Yeah,
Because
but I just think that the way that they were portrayed is kind of like, they. I guess you could say that news, obviously, is not as very well filtered. I guess you could say as no, it's not kind of like what we have today. I mean, obviously we're talking about time in the 1800s, so obviously it's like where people believe quite a lot of things at that time. But they're sort of kind of like portrayed as like they'll believe at first bounce, but then all of a sudden like it's kind of like well they are intelligent and like where they read complicated books and like they build businesses and like they campaign on things and things like that, and like they sort of like I don't know, like I don't think this movie I feel like knows who our protagonists are in regards to like I guess you could say one thing I kind of compared them to is kind of like Luz Noceda from like the Owl House, I guess you could say, but some of these characters that we have are like they're fully grown adults and not like impressionable teenagers.
I mean,
So, like,
again,
I don't know.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, these are like simple country people who are living in the outskirts of the middle of nowhere in Russia. They probably don't have a lot of people that they interact with. I mean, mice, well, I should say. They don't have a lot of mice they interact with. I mean, they're just like in the middle of nowhere, and they I'm sure they have like their communities and such, but they all have the same mindset of like living off their normal lives and trying to make do with what they have. I mean, that's what a lot of these people were around the late 1800s.
Okay, I'll accept that. So that's a fair point. And so we end up with the attack happens, and then their lives basically just get destroyed.
Yeah.
And so again at that point, like they have no choice but basically to say we need to go find a better place for ourselves because we are eventually going to get killed.
Yeah.
So that ends up with them going on the ship and sailing the treacherous couple of days to go to America. However, Fievel gets lost along the way, and because he gets interested in fish. And so he's interested in seeing the fish, so he goes up the stairs and says that, I need to go get my hat back. And though his father tries to bravely rescue him, he ends up being swept out to sea. And just by some miracle, he ends up in a bottle and ends up near where the still being constructed Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
And by the way, I know what people are going to probably say next is like, Aaron's going to complain because this is another movie that takes place in New York City. No, this is one of the very rare moments where going to New York City actually makes sense.
Yes.
Because that's where most of the immigrants actually went.
Yes, they did. Yeah. Yes. More specifically, they went over to Ellis Island, where that was kind of like the main point where they would able to get all the immigrants and have them stand in line. They tell them their names. They tell them where they originally came from. They were checked to make sure that they didn't carry any lice or any diseases, and if they did, they had to be sent back home. And yeah, I mean, it was brief, but in the middle of the movie where we had people lining up, and then they were saying like what their names were, and then the people who were like tracking them down would say like, okay, we're gonna change your name to Smith. We're gonna change your name to this and that, so it can be more Americanized. And that's what happens to Tilly and Tanya, where her name was changed to Tilly. And I mean, I guess very well known fact about that, where a lot of immigrants, when they came over to America, they had American names, and that way they can be able to fit better into society. And then we see that Fievel, even though he
Yeah, well, it's kind of really kind of is disgusting when you really think about it, because they also did that to the slaves as well. Like, they gave them all Americanized names. And,
Yes, they did.
Yeah, they did, and so I think that's a pretty shameful part of America's history, unfortunately.
Yeah. Anyway, but we finally get to see Fievel as he finally sees the Statue of Liberty. He makes his self trying to look around his surroundings, and then he meets up with a pigeon named Henri, who is actually helping construct a little bit of the Statue of Liberty from the inside. And he talks to him. He tries to find out where his family is, and so Henri tells him, well, I'm going to take you to where Ellis Island is and where all the immigrants meet up with. Maybe your family is there. And then he stumbles upon Warren T. Rat, who claims that he's going to find Fievel's family, but in reality, he takes him over to a sweatshop.
Exactly, yeah, and it's kind of funny, because throughout, the first parts of the act, you get to see, because this is all portrayed, within cartoon animal form.
Yes.
The way that this is going on, but at the same time, you also have the human side of it all being, portrayed as well. So simultaneously, you've got the the younger audience, putting their emotions into the animal characters, and you've got the adults in the room also looking, oh hey, these there's the real people, we're humans actually, going through the same struggles and through the same problems and things like that.
Yeah.
So the great thing about this is that it's able to be all encompassing towards its audience, because it knows there's going to be young people there. It knows there's going to be parents there. It knows even adults who are fans of animations are going to be there too. And the great way that they did the presentation is that they showed both sides. They showed the animated side, cartoon animal funny side, and they showed the human side of this as well, which I think is brilliant. I think that was a great direction to go in.
Yeah, and all of the humans are.
It would have been easy for them to sorry, keep it sorry. It would have been easy for them to basically just say, oh, we sound like these cartoon animals, and just do this, that, and the other, and just ignore the human thing entirely. I'm looking at you, Titanic animated movies, but I mean they could have easily have done that, and but thankfully no, they went in this direction where they knew who was in the theater at the time, and they did a good job of it.
Yeah, I mean it makes a lot of sense considering that Don Bluth had felt that Disney had lost his direction, and so he was akin to trying to do his films that were inspired by Disney films from the 1930s and 40s, and so you can definitely see where it's rotoscoped with the humans, where you have that smooth animation of the human side, and then you have this lively cartoony side with the mice, and it definitely plays into both the adults and the kids who can be able to enjoy it. But yeah, I mean, if you were to...
The one thing I would say about rotoscoping, though, is that, keep in mind, An American Tail came out in 1986.
Yeah.
The BFG came out a few years before that.
It came out a few years after.
Oh, did it? Oh, okay.
1989.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I keep thinking it came out before I was born. I don't know why I keep thinking that. But, in the 80s, rotoscoping was something that was kind of being done at the time. Like Lord of the Rings, movie also did rotoscoping.
That was in the 70s.
That was in the 70s. And, also, we had the BFG that also did the rotoscoping as well. Yes. With the helicopters, which I thought was brilliant. And then you got rotoscoping here, and it's actually really good because they understood the object that was in front of them, and they knew how to animate it. You feel sick seeing that ship being thrown around in the ocean, and you get to feel emotion with the song number, because you got Fievel and you've got Tilly standing on
Tanya.
Tanya, sorry, going on different standing on different objects, and instead of we're just going to keep them solid, we're going to have them move around in the in the space scene and in the stars scene, and I thought that was really good how they did all of that, and they understood the objects in front of them and how to have them carry emotional weight.
Yeah,
I thought that was very good.
Yeah, and I also enjoy the fact that whereas the mice were very fully animated and they have a lot of life to them, and the human side is a little bit more stilted, and yet at the same time they move with purpose. You get to see people waiting in line, and you get to see people in the ship trying to get their herrings from the barrels, or maybe they're enjoying a lively party, or the scene in which when you have women who are working in the sweatshop utilizing the sewing machines or anything like that. So yeah, New York City in the 1880s just feels so alive, and it's so realistic because yeah, I mean, we'll get to this later on, but the whole stories of America being the land of opportunity and, the streets are made of cheese and there are no cats in America, well, that all turns out to be lies. And
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and the immigrants, unfortunately, I mean, both human and mice would learn that the hard way, where they were going through a lot of struggles, like living in, for the most part, the land of poverty, where they were living in like tight knit apartments, and they were living in so much filth and a lot of diseases, and depending on where you live, there was a lot of crime that was happening, whether it be with the mafia or in this case, Warren T. Ratton.
Well, there was corruption as well. Like you saw like what was his name, Honest John, going around like stealing votes off dead people.
Yeah, so, and that is actually based off of a real politician in New York City.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was a lot of like corruption going on, as you know, and people just been taken advantage of. And so the one great thing about it is that this isn't just haha cartoon, things like that. They showed like the real raw emotional side of like what's going on in here.
And for the most part, it all actually happened.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the one thing they weren't shying away from was that what the reality was during that time. So if anything, it's a really great piece of like how to teach people like this is what New York City and what immigration was like back in the day.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the great things about this piece of media, that it doesn't shy away from how gritty it actually is. Like, I mean, I'm not saying it's Secret of Myth gritty or anything like that. Like, I think I would say it takes a bit step away from Secret of Myth, if you ask me. But I think it's not still afraid to show what the situation was at the time, and I think it does a very good job at that.
Yeah, and that's why Don Bluth had a major household name around the 80s, was because he was able to push things that not even Disney were going to be doing at the time. I mean, they tried to go a little bit more serious with the Black Cauldron, and it just fell flat on its face.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, you have like Don Bluth, who was able to showcase The Secret of NIMH, where rats were actually being experimented on in the National Institute of Mental Health. And you have immigrants who are going through the struggles and the triumphs of moving from one country to another around the late 1800s. So yeah, I mean, all of this stuff was actually happening, and sadly is happening to this very day.
I think where the American tale succeeds, where the Black Cauldron fails. I mean, the Black Cauldron fails on many attempts, really, but I think where what the American tale gets right is that they don't shy away from the truth in this thing.
That's true.
I mean, like a lot of the gore, I would say, in the Black Cauldron is just done for fantasy trope, and so there's nothing really like you can really put any emotion into in regards to the Black Cauldron, because it's not really a lived experience, and like whereas American tale is a lived experience from people who write history books and have ancestors that moved over from to the land of opportunity, quote unquote, and now are generations from immigrants of that day, so there is more of an emotional weight to an American tale. You can't emotionally involve yourself in the Black Cauldron, because how many people have gone and seen an ancient cauldron and put a skeleton inside of it to unleash all the warriors of the dead. I mean, I did. I was about to say, unless you're high on drugs, I don't think you ever did that. But, I mean,
or you're a LARPer.
And I digress. I mean, but yeah, the fact still stand is that there is far more, to give to an American Tale than there is to, some of the other flops that were going around in the 80s.
Yeah.
And American Tale shows that. And American Tale wasn't a flop. It was a massive success.
Yeah, it was a massive success, yeah. Yeah, so Fievel ends up in the sweatshop, and he meets up with another character, Tony Toponi.
Now, I'm very critical about this because, how much time do we spend in the sweatshop?
Less than 10 minutes.
No further questions. So, I mean, look at Wonka, for example. You have Wonka, who, and I get it's a movie that took place decades later, but, I still feel the point still stands, where, Wonka ends up, in, effectively, this wash house, and is forced to basically pay off, the debts of, staying there, and he's trapped, basically, in this whole situation. And, but, he gets to meet other people in there. He's actually in there for a considerable amount of time, and he works to get himself out of that situation. So there is that whole, the story sort of wraps around that. In this, it's kind of actually we're not even there for 10 minutes. We're there for we're only for a small segment of the movie, and then after that, Fievel just says, "Oh, well, let's just tie these sheets together and let's just all escape." and then we move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I have a interesting story behind why the film feels very scattered and truncated, but we'll get to that later.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay, well.
Anyway, so
I
yeah.
mean, I'll have to get into it now if you want.
Okay, yeah. So there's a reason why it feels very scattered and all over the place is because there were several scenes that were cut from this movie. And the reason why is because they wanted to truncate it for time, or it was because there were some scenes that were way too scary for kids. So, yeah, like...
Oh, boo-hoo. Give us the uncut version for crying out loud.
Well, yeah, they did the same thing with Land Before Time, in which that a few minutes were cut from that movie, too, where it was going to be that Sarah and Littlefoot were chased by the shark.
I don't think that, 80s and 90s kids have not had things that scarred us in our childhood, at all. Seeing kids get electrocuted in PSAs and, all that kind of stuff. I've shown us some of the PSAs that we have, in
yes,
the UK.
you have, and it is terrifying.
I would happily watch the uncut version of The American Sale.
Yeah.
I would happily watch it.
Yeah, and I remember some critics were saying, oh, wait a minute, there's some scenes in which you have the Mousekewitzes with the baby, and then there's some, it's like, where's the baby? Well, apparently there were supposed to be a few scenes in which that the baby was being watched by a neighbor or something, and then there was some other scenes that were also cut from the movie, with more interactions with Fievel and Tiger, and more stuff with Fievel in the city. So yeah, there's a reason why it does feel like it's all over the place, because this movie was shrunken down to what it was originally supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly, and which is a shame, really, because the problem with that is that now the one thing I'm really critical about the American Tale story is that we're in this thing for a few moments, we're in that thing for a few moments, we're in that thing for a few moments, we're in that thing for a few moments, and also on top of that, really, if you really think about it, none of the side characters get any development.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing,
even if they do get development, they're rushed, and they're just done in one scene and we're done.
Yeah, those are the exact same complaints that we said about Once Upon a Forest, and that was done by the same writer.
Exactly, yeah, and but I mean, you can't really blame the writer at this point. Stuff was cut for time, and
yes.
I imagine he didn't have any say in that. But I mean, unfortunately, the one thing that I was gonna say, I was gonna probably leave this until the end of the podcast, but pretty much might as well say it now, is that the reason why I don't feel as emotionally involved in American Tale as I do probably in other movies, and why I don't go back to American Tale, and I actually asked myself, why have I not gone back to American Tale in such a long time when we've gone back to other ones? We actually went back to things like the Aristocrats and where some of the other classic.
You mean the Aristocats?
The Aristocats, yeah.
Yeah, the Aristocrats is a different movie.
The
Aristocrats.
Yeah. So I asked myself, why have we gone to all these movies, but we never thought, oh, let's check out this movie and that movie, and the story sort of explains why I don't, because there's we go too quickly through all of this. I get New York is a big place and we need to go through it all and stuff like that, and this is actually one of the few movies where I'm actually glad we go to New York City, but unfortunately it's sort of like a whistle stop tour. It's we've been here, actually tell you what, it's like a tour of New York City when you think about it. Here's the Statue of Liberty, here's the Empire State Building, come on, everybody, keep up, keep up with my flag, everything like that. Let's go through that. It kind of feels like a tour more than it does feel like a story that actually we're going through with where the immigration struggles that Fievel and his family are going through, and Fievel getting lost, actually trying to find his family. It feels more like we are constantly stuck with Fievel, and there's no one else that is able to basically breathe in this movie. Fievel has to be the important thing throughout this thing. Where you have Fievel and Tanya who get a song number, and but besides that, nobody else really gets any time in this movie. Do you really? Do you feel that way?
I do agree. Yeah, and I even
I'm surprised you don't get tired of Fievel by the time you get to the end.
Yeah,
of the movie.
I kind of said a similar complaint when I looked back on The American Tale alongside with the other Sullivan Blues Studios movies over 10 years ago when I did this podcast with Jaime Tude and Animat. And yeah, I mean, even Mars Girl did a similar complaint as well, where she felt that the movie was going too quickly. And yeah, I mean, even though that you said the complete opposite when we were discussing about this in our Once Upon a Forest discussion, yeah, I mean, all those things that you were mentioning, both American Tale and Land Before Time did the same thing. Okay, you have Fievel finally making it into America after the wave crashed into him. And you have one moment in which, he's helping out the pigeon building the Statue of Liberty. Then he hears the violin. It's like, okay, now we're going to go into another side story involving with Honest John, and he's collecting the votes from all these dead mice so that he can be able to get votes. And you have his companion Gussy, who wants to be able to take down the cat. Okay, we're going to go into another moment in which we're going to have Tony, and Tony's going to help him. But then he meets up with this Irish girl who wants to be able to bring awareness to the cats, and then that gets sidelined. And then Fievel gets captured by a guy who runs a sweatshop, and now he has to work for him. Oh, what about Warren T. Rat? And, he's going to be dragged down there. So it's like, yeah, all that stuff actually happens throughout the course of An American Tail, where you have all of these sequence moments happening all at once.
An American Tail, that sort of makes sense because, Fievel is going through New York City when he arrives. So,
Yes.
that's what New York is. Like, it's not just one story. It's millions of stories going on at once. Anyone who's actually been to New York City would actually understand.
To be fair, he hadn't seen the movie in a long time, so he was just going by memory alone. But then, when he saw the movie again, then it's like, oh, wait, yeah.
I can see the problems here.
Yeah, now he can see the problems.
Exactly, yeah, and here's the thing about this, I'm trying my best not to take too much away from American Tail, because I know a lot of people do like American Tail.
Yeah.
But, compared to, other movies that I've watched, in the 80s and the 90s, and all the movies that me and Patricia have talked about for, years since, I can kind of see why this one doesn't stick in my mind as much as it does.
All right.
And why it's not my first go-to. I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but...
to be fair, American Tail wasn't my favorite Don Bluth movie. It's always been Land Before Time, personally, for me.
I like Secret and Nymph. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I can see why some people absolutely love it, because there's a lot of things to like about this, so I guess we can continue on. So, yeah, Tony decides to call Fievel Philly, because it's like the whole American name thing, and, yeah, he helps try to find his, Fievel's family, but then he gets distracted by Bridget, who is an Irish mouse, who's talking about, we need to be able to, stand up to the cats. She's doing a whole protest thing, which kind of reminds me of how women would discuss about the suffrage movement, saying women should have rights just as much as men, or various other things. There was a lot of even religious organizations who would talk about abstinence from alcohol, women's rights, various other things. And so Tony gets extremely distracted immediately with Bridget, and then Fievel is kind of left on his own for a while.
He's into strong women.
Yeah, sure. And then they finally reunite with one another. And that's when he meets up with Honest John and Gussy. So, yeah, Honest John is this corrupt politician who's just completely drunk. And he's taking off votes from dead mice so that he can be able to win in the elections. And then Gussy is this rich, bureaucratic mouse who, very similar to Bridget, wants to be able to get rid of the cats once and for all. And, yeah, she's kind of a little... Even though that she's, really strong with her protests, let's be honest. It looks like she's never suffered any poverty in her entire life, and everybody just points out that, yeah, you're rich, what do you need to care about the cats and all that kind of stuff?
Well, but the thing is that the one thing I would say is that obviously education probably was not very very far and few between, I think, amongst the populace, I think, of New York City at that time.
That's right, yeah.
And so I think I think as much as you would criticize the wealthy for getting involved in what effectively was a working class movement, it's they've had the education, they've had the ability to argue their case for them. So those who were who were quite powerful within society also had a responsibility towards the people around them, and they're mice too.
Yes.
This is the thing, effectively what affects all the other mice in this area will also affect them as well, because the cats are after them too.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and
they have a vested interest in staying alive. So
yeah, exactly. And that's why Gussy had collaborated with Warren T. Rat, because she was given the promise to Warren that, oh, I'm going to protect you from the cats, even though that she has no idea that Warren T. Rat is actually a cat, and all the cats that have been chasing after the mice, who Warren T. Rat promised was going to stay away from the mice, he's the one who's leading them.
Yeah, and he's actually a cat.
Yes, he is a very small cat.
God, this kind of reminds me of that episode of The Recess when where they find out the imposter is actually a 40-year-old man.
Oh yeah, I remember that episode.
My God.
Yes,
I remember that episode. That stuck out for me. It's oh, grow up. But I love that comeback. But anyway, going back to An American Tail, is that it's incredible. You have the smaller cat who is is able to pass off as a mouse, and ends up fleecing effectively this whole population of immigrants, and having his way with them. And so this whole cat cabal is kind of involved in terrorizing this whole community of immigrant mice. And it's only the great message about it is that when it comes to being terrorized by this this small group of people, if everyone bands together and does something about it, where they can, work for a better future.
Yeah.
And so this movie is very hopeful, and which
Yeah,
I think is great.
Yeah, and exactly a perfect mood and a perfect atmosphere, considering that this movie is about mice who are trying to find the land of opportunity because they are living in harsh times, and so they go over to a country where they're promised a lot of safety and a lot of wealth. But in reality, they are in a much more harder situation where they're in a country that they are not familiar with. They're in surroundings that they're not familiar with. And also, I mean, most likely they don't speak English. And so they have to learn how to speak English. I mean, you come from like living in the countryside of Russia to the streets of New York City. It's like, that is a massive, massive jump into a culture that is like far and beyond anything that you've been accustomed to all your life.
Yeah. So, then the mice band together and say, well, we're gonna do this plan, and Fievel puts in what he thinks is, the best idea that we can come up with, and so they end up building the secret weapon.
Yeah, the secret weapon, which is the giant mouse of Minsk.
Yeah. So that ends getting putting together. However, unfortunately, Fievel and his friend end up being late for trying to get to there, and Fievel actually ends up getting catch up by the cats.
Yeah.
And but this bit doesn't make any sense. The cats who been killing mice left, right, and center. Why did they not kill Fievel in this situation?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Why? What was the? I mean, if it was we need to keep him alive for this purpose, and then so we need to keep him captured until this thing has happened, and then after that we can kill him.
I mean, I guess maybe
again, that must probably been in there must have been a story plot that was cut out for time. But
maybe.
I mean, when if they did take that out, I mean, that was a really foolish thing to do, because there's no reason to keep Fievel alive in that situation.
Unless of course if Warren T. Rat wanted to take Fievel back to the sweatshop that he had sold him for, so that it would be like, oh well, this kid ran off, and maybe Warren T. Rat's like, no, I found the kid, you can take him back, where's my money for him, so that you can be able to use him for...
You know what, they should have utilized that more then, because the sale had already transactioned, so
yes.
That was, so that's where plot point is moot at that point. So I mean, they should have had it where oh hey, I'll sell you this kid, but I want to make sure that I get paid for that. And it's but there should have been some extra dialogue in there saying, the cat's like, oh yeah, here's this rat, let's slice him up, let's draw, have him drawn and quartered, and but then Warren T. Rat basically turns on and says, no, I've got a business deal with this kid, leave him with me. Then he basically keeps him in that cage.
Yeah.
And then it's up to the other cat, basically Tiger, to let him go, and then after that we know that all that takes place. But there should have been extra dialogue in there to kind of make that clear. There isn't.
I do agree, yeah. So Fievel and Tiger become friends, and I mean, we saw...
It's funny, though, because they have this number about becoming friends, but then they separate immediately. It's and then, Tiger's sort of, not there until the final act.
Yeah.
So, another part that this part is rushed.
Yeah, again, that was actually one of the scenes that was cut from the movie.
Why? There's no point in it. This is the thing that makes this movie less memorable. Is all you do is give us a bunch of scenes that all kind of taped together, and then you already moved on to the next thing. It's well, I was getting emotionally involved, and now you want me to get emotionally involved in this thing. This movie becomes tiring at times. Where we finally get to the point where they do their plan, and then the cats are all sent off to Hong Kong, and but then Fievel gets swept away again, and then he ends up in this orphan garden or whatever. And where all these other rats start suspiciously look like the Alvin and the Chipmunks for whatever reason. I mean, that bit took me way out of it after that. It's all right, then we're having that, and then they zoom it all out, and it almost kind of feels like they're gonna have a sad ending to this movie, and it's just, come on, when are we gonna get to the end of this thing? And
there's been a tease every so often about how even though that Fievel and his family are so close of meeting up with one another, they never meet up with one another, because
I think they play that for laughs, and it's not funny. It's not funny.
They don't play it for laughs. They play it for oh, he's just right there. Just look behind you.
But that's supposed to be the comedic part of it. And it's not funny. I'm sorry, it isn't. Like you said, anything. It's just frustrating to look at.
I mean, I think it's supposed to be tension.
Isn't that another thing? This movie feels frustrating at times, doesn't it?
Okay, explain.
I mean, they tease it they're gonna bump into each other at some point. Oh, where there's a scene where I can't see Fievel on the stage, and oh, come on, get to the point where they're actually gonna meet one another.
I mean, the reason why is because they want to build up to it so that the ending would be even more satisfying. It's kind of like what Doug Walker, aka the Nostalgia Critic, would say. Is like this movie, as well as other early Don Bluth movies, just gets you so low in the emotions, and then when there's a happy ending, that just brings it all up, and then you just make up for it.
I disagree with Doug on that one. I like for me, it's kind of like it would have been better if it was like the father was saying like oh, I believe that he's dead, but where Tanya continues to like dump the fact like we don't know that for a fact. He could be alive somewhere. Like we should continue like saying we keep trying and trying and trying. She pushes him to do it, and even though he's like already mourning the loss of his son, and like that was enough in my opinion to like push us towards the end where like and he's had all this like hope. His hope has been like Tanya has continued to build hope in her dad, and then finally we get to the end and he realizes his son is actually alive, and that I think was enough for me.
Okay,
I thought that should have been the build up, not like teasing us with these comedic things where like oh, they're so close to one another, why can't they just turn their head around or something like that. That to me wasn't I didn't really care for that, to be honest with you.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so now we finally get the ending where finally they reunite with one another and everything's happy and everything is joyous, and then the movie ends about 1 year later when the Statue of Liberty is finally completed and they fly up into the sky and see all of New York City and all of America.
And the Statue of Liberty winks at you for some strange reason, but yeah, because I guess if there's talking animals in this movie, I guess the Statue of Liberty could be alive as well.
Sure.
Yeah, like
I'm
just glad she didn't do a dance number or anything like that.
Well, I mean,
can you imagine they announced if they launched the American Tale like like in the 2010s? I tell you, the Statue of Liberty were doing Gangnam Style. Like
why? No. You're done. You're done.
Yeah, I'm saying that's what they would have done if they released it in 2010 and like where they had it had no soul whatsoever. We had Gangnam Style, Statue of Liberty. Anyway,
okay, let's finish up this.
Anyway, in conclusion for American Tail, I mean, like, I can sort of, here's the thing, like, after watching it, I can see what they were trying to achieve here to keep me involved emotionally in the movie, and, a lot of the visuals and a lot of the story elements and a lot of, here's the thing, elements, like, they have a lot of elements that they have together in this movie, but the problem is that when they cut so much stuff out and they didn't add certain dialogue or they didn't, like, bridge certain things together, really all we got is, like, just a compilation of like what can happen in New York City when you really remove everything else out of it, and you remove where the Fievel trying to find his family element out of it. That's all you kind of really get in all of this. It kind of feels more like we're following Fievel the entire time, and nobody else gets any development in this movie. And if they do, it's done for a scene, and then after that they just become another side character, and there's no like arc for them to kind of like go along. It's like at least with some of the other movies that we've had, at least where we're not following in the 80s and the 90s, we're not following our protagonist the entire time, and where it gives opportunities for other side characters to kind of tell their stories and say like what their backgrounds are and what their emotions are and everything like that. And American Tail unfortunately doesn't do that.
Right.
Like if anything, the whole story centers around Fievel trying to like find his way through New York City and try and find his family, and that's the only story that we're effectively going to have for like the next 80 minutes. And so yeah, I mean, like, are we gonna do scores at this point, or are we gonna
what did you think of the movie? I mean, what did you think? What did you think of the music of the movie? Because there are actually a few song numbers.
It's James Horner. I mean, like the one thing I really like about it is that I remember when I did an episode of the Hey Arnold Anniversary show, and I spoke to Craig Bartlett about remember Lane Torren was like doing the musical number for It's Fruits.
Yes.
And the problem is that he's actually professionally trained in regards to singing, so he really ramped it up, in regards to professional, way. But it's like Craig had to stop him and say, no, it's not that. It's it sounds more like a school play, and it needs to sound a bit more like so tone it down, bring it down a little bit and kind of make it more like a kids thing. And that's what they did with Fievel, and that's what they did with Tanya, and I thought that added a lot more emotional depth, I think, to their song number, and that was a really brilliant thing to do, because where they're not Hollywood singers by any stretch of the imagination. They're not doing stage productions or anything like that. Like these are two immigrant children who like are just have hopes and dreams, and want to start their new lives together, and will want to find one another, and know that one of them is out there still somewhere. And so that I think is probably the song number that I think will is one of the best song numbers that I've heard in a movie. So because they nailed the tone, and they nailed the song, and they nailed the visuals, spectacularally in that. Even though where they took the moon from Majora's Mask, and that was going to be smashing into New York City. I mean, that took me a bit out of the moment, but that's just me being being stupid Nintendo. But I mean,
it was actually the very first song from a animated film that was not done by Disney that was nominated for Best Original Song in the Academy Awards. Like, no other movie had done that before. And it wouldn't be until, I think, another 10 years later in which you had what was it? Prince of Egypt, When You Believe, which was the one that won the Oscar for Best Original Song for an Oscar for an animated film, and wouldn't win again for a non-Disney film to win the Oscar for Best Original Song until, believe it or not, Golden by K-pop Demon Hunters.
Well, there you go. I mean, it just shows how special this song is actually.
Yeah.
So, actually, well, tell you what, I mean, Golden actually did win, didn't it? So,
it did win, yes.
Well, there you go. It took a couple of decades, but they got there in the end. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's your fun fact. 2 non-Disney songs that have ever won for Best Original Song in the Academy Awards. When You Believe, Prince of Egypt, Golden, K-pop Demon Hunters. That's it.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so it is true that the version of Somewhere Out There that is more remembered than the actual movie is the version that Linda Ronstadt and James Ingram sung together. And of course, you have the music video in which they kind of sing it like a love ballad, even though in the context of the movie, it's not a love ballad.
That was sort of the style at the time, because if you remember, Disney started doing that as well. So, where you had a whole new world that
that didn't happen until years later.
Well, Beauty and the Beast also did that as well.
Again, years later.
And then also, Little Mermaid had various, romanticized, versions of their songs, including, a couple of years later when Peter Andre did Kiss the Girl.
Yes.
So, this, in the 80s and the 90s wasn't new.
That's true.
So, it's something that, did exist, during that time. And dare I say, I think she'll probably come back because, I do like the romance ballad of, certain songs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm surprised they didn't do one for Let It Go. I'm really surprised they didn't do that.
Yeah.
But there's Dubstep's version of Let It Go, for crying out loud.
Fair enough.
But I mean, so the emotional weight, I think that they had with Somewhere Out There, I think it can be done in various forms. And I've only heard the theatrical version. I've only seen also heard the single one that came out for the movie. But
the single one is the one that is the most popular.
It is, yeah.
And for good reason. I mean, you have Linda Ronstadt, who was at the height of her career, and she was known for a lot of her amazing songs. I mean, just before this, she did a great collaboration with Aaron Neville, where they were able to sing. I forget what the name of the song was, but they had that great collaboration together. And then she started branching out with a whole bunch of different albums and singles that became really, really popular. In fact, the only reason why they were able to connect Linda Ronstadt to this movie in the first place was because of George Lucas, because he was dating Linda Ronstadt at the time, and because of his collaboration with Steven Spielberg was how they were able to squeeze in Linda Ronstadt to sing this song in the movie.
Yeah, but I mean, if you had to put the two against each other, I think Somewhere Out There, done by the single version, I think carries the style, but I think the theatrical version carries the emotion.
I do agree.
Yeah. So there's the difference between the two.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say that depending on which version you listen to, I mean, you watch the theatrical version for the context of the story and the emotions that carry in through it, and then you listen to the single version where you're able to listen to a beautiful love ballad that was really popular with the time. And so you do get that context of how each of the songs fare out. Unfortunately, none of the other songs seem to be as fondly remembered compared to Somewhere Out There, like Cats in America, Never Say Never, We're a Duo. The other ones just don't seem to really gravitate to as much people as Somewhere Out There.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I can, again, given the fact that we have an amazing single by Linda Ronstadt and James Ingram, and considering on the context of the theatrical version, I can understand why.
Yeah. I mean, in regards to the first, installment of, a Fievel story, I mean, like, I would say, they got off to a very good start.
Yeah.
I think in regards to that, it's just too bad that, unfortunately, it's more like, there's too much variety in regards to, like, where the story goes with Fievel and, like, the situation they find themselves in. They're not very well glued together. That's the one thing I would be really critical about. I mean, like, I would love to go into, the legacy, like, and also, like, the franchise, like, and again with that. But, to be honest with you, we're going to be covering that, like, for a series of podcasts over the next couple of episodes.
The only exception, and I know some people will be really disappointed, we will not be covering the American Tail TV series.
Yeah, so we will, cover the movies, but unfortunately, we're strapped for time, and so like we're gonna cover the movies, and that's about it.
Yeah,
so.
Maybe we'll do the animated series another time, but for the most part, we're just gonna stick to the movies.
Cool.
All right, so yeah, I think that we can start giving this a score.
Yeah, so a movie that's based in like fantasy and reality, a movie that's got some emotional carry to it. The problem is that the one thing that weighs it down, unfortunately, and the reason why I don't remember it all that well, is that the story is just too chop and stuck together, and it just for me it just doesn't carry as well and isn't as fluid, I think, as other movies I grew up with during the 80s and the 90s. And so don't get me wrong, it's Fievel is a very good protagonist, and I don't take anything away from that from him. I think I think he was in a more joined up story. I think his journey I think will probably carry a lot more weight. Going through New York City, is actually a treat, rather than oh good grief, we're only going here because there's too much that can go on here. I really think I'll just simply say this: the reason why I complain so much about going to New York City is because there's no emotional connection with the Smurfs, there's no emotional connection with Tom and Jerry, there's no emotional connection with other times that we've been to New York City. This makes sense. This is the reason why we go to New York City, and definitely when it takes place in 1885. So for me, right location, right characters, right narrative. Unfortunately, story that could be a lot better, unfortunately. So where I'm going to go with this, I'm going to say 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, 7.5 out of 10. Pretty much for the same reason that Aaron did. And yeah, I think that the fact that, people still have an appreciation for this film, it still stuck around, but a lot of people say that even though that it was like the most successful of Don Bluth's films at the time until Land Before Time came out, and then later on Anastasia came out. But yeah, this is a good starting point for the reputation that Don Bluth would carry throughout the 80s and the 90s. And so yeah, I would say that if you are interested in having an interesting starting point for where Don Bluth's career would go at this point, this is a good one to start off with, but I'm sure a lot of people would just say start off with Secret of Nim.
Yeah. So everybody, we are going to be going into our next Fievel adventure, which is going to be Fievel Goes West. However,
yes.
will this go west or will it go south?
Until then, everyone, take care.